The mall was alive with the sound of weekend chatter, footsteps on polished tiles, and the faint echo of music drifting from a distant speaker. Glass storefronts shimmered under bright lights, and the smell of coffee and cinnamon rolls lingered in the air. In the middle of the bustling crowd, Sandra Bullock moved quietly, her cap pulled low over her forehead, her hair tucked into a simple braid. She wasn't here as a movie star tonight. She was just a woman searching for a small birthday gift for a friend. Across the atrium, Keanu Reeves walked alone, wearing a plain, dark jacket and faded jeans. He wasn't looking for attention either. He carried himself with the same quiet humility that had followed him through life. His steps were unhurried, but his eyes were always scanning, watching people, noticing details others might miss. Unbeknownst to either of them, the mall was becoming restless. A technical issue had caused the escalator on the upper floor to stop abruptly earlier, creating small clusters of frustrated shoppers. A flash sale in a nearby store had drawn an even bigger crowd than expected. Whispers of impatience traveled through the corridors like an unseen current. Sandra found the boutique she was searching for and stepped inside. The shop was cozy, filled with soft light and the faint scent of lavender candles. She chose a delicate silver bracelet, smiling at the thought of her friend's reaction. She didn't notice how crowded the mall had become outside. Keanu, meanwhile, had paused near the center fountain, drawn by the laughter of two children tossing coins into the water. He smiled faintly, remembering his own childhood, moments of simplicity before life grew complicated. But then, from the corner of his eye, he noticed a shift in the movement of the crowd. A group of shoppers had spilled out from a store, colliding with another group coming from the food court. The air changed, soft laughter replaced by raised voices and hurried footsteps. Sandra stepped back into the corridor just as the surge began. Dozens of people were pressing forward from multiple directions, their voices overlapping in a confused chorus. Someone shouted about a child who had fallen. A stroller tipped over. The energy of the mall turned from festive to tense in seconds. She felt the push of the crowd against her shoulder. She tried to step aside, but the wave of people left little space. A man bumped into her, muttering an apology, and she stumbled slightly. The bracelet box slipped from her hand and skittered across the floor. Keanu's gaze locked on her from across the atrium. He saw her small stumble, the look of surprise in her eyes, and the tightening flow of bodies around her. His instincts sharpened in an instant. He began moving quickly, not rushing recklessly, but weaving through the crowd with calm precision. His movements were deliberate, smooth, as if the noise and chaos around him had slowed down. Sandra bent to retrieve the bracelet box, but the movement of the crowd shifted suddenly. Someone shoved past her, and she lost her balance completely. Her cap slipped off, and a wave of voices rose as people realized who she was. A ripple of recognition spread, adding to the confusion. Keanu reached her just as the crowd surged again. Without hesitation, he stepped in front of her, shielding her with his body. "Stay close," he said softly but firmly. She looked up, startled to see him, but relief washed over her face. "Keanu?" she whispered. He offered a small, calm smile even as the crowd pressed harder. "Let's get you out of here." The mall's security team was still on the far side of the atrium, trying to direct the flow of people. Keanu guided Sandra toward a narrow service hallway he had spotted earlier. He kept his hand lightly on her arm. Not tight, not forceful, just steady and reassuring. As they moved, a woman tripped nearby, her shopping bag spilling across the floor. Keanu stopped, even with the chaos around him, to help her up and gather her things. Sandra watched this small act of kindness, her chest tightening. Even now, he wasn't just protecting her. He was protecting everyone he could. They reached the hallway where the noise of the crowd dulled slightly. Sandra's breathing was uneven. She leaned against the wall for a moment, clutching the bracelet box she had retrieved. "Are you okay?" Keanu asked gently. She nodded, though her voice trembled. I didn't expect tonight to turn into this." "Crowds can change fast," he said. "But you're safe now." In the distance, the mall's announcement system crackled to life, instructing shoppers to remain calm and move slowly. The sound of security whistles and distant chatter echoed faintly. As they waited for the situation outside to settle, Sandra felt a strange mix of fear and gratitude. She looked at Keanu, at the quiet steadiness in his eyes, the way he carried himself even in moments of uncertainty. "You didn't have to help me," she said softly. He shrugged, his expression humble. "Of course I did." The simple words hung between them, warm and grounding, but the night wasn't done surprising them. From deeper in the hallway, a faint cry echoed, a child's voice, small and scared. Sandra and Keanu exchanged a glance. Without a word, they began moving toward the sound. They turned a corner and found a little boy, no older than 6, standing alone near a closed maintenance door. His cheeks were streaked with tears, his small backpack hanging loosely from one shoulder. "Hey, buddy," Keanu said gently, kneeling to the boy's level. "Are you lost?" The boy nodded, sniffing. "I can't find my mom." Sandra crouched beside him, her voice soft. "We'll help you, okay? You're not alone." The distant noise of the crowd still hummed behind them. But here, in this quiet corner, something else filled the air, a sense of purpose, of connection, of a new story beginning. As Keanu took the boy's small hand, Sandra felt the weight of the moment settle in her heart. Tonight wasn't just about a stumble in a mall. It was about choices, about stepping forward when it mattered most. Outside, the mall's noise began to fade, replaced by the steady hum of order returning. But for Sandra, Keanu, and the small boy gripping Keanu's hand, the night's most important story was just beginning to unfold. The mall was quieter now, but a strange tension still lingered in the air like the echo of a storm. Outside the service hallway, the main atrium had begun to clear as security guided shoppers to the exits. Distant announcements reassured people that the situation was under control. But inside Sandra Bullock's chest, her heartbeat was still quick. She glanced at Keanu Reeves and the small boy standing between them. The boy's hand was gripping Keanu's so tightly that his knuckles were white. "What's your name, buddy?" Keanu asked gently, crouching again to meet the boy's wide, tearful eyes. "Liam," the boy sniffed. His voice was small and shaky. "I was with my mom near the fountain, but then people started pushing. She told me to hold her hand, but someone bumped us, and I couldn't see her anymore." Sandra felt her throat tighten. She could almost feel the boy's fear. How small the world must have felt when the crowd closed in. She knelt beside him and spoke softly. "Liam, your mom is probably looking everywhere for you right now. We're going to help you find her. You're safe with us." A faint tremor ran through the hallway as a maintenance cart rolled past. The sudden sound made Liam flinch. Keanu gave his hand a reassuring squeeze. "Storms feel scary when you're in them," he said, his tone calm and steady. "But storms pass. We'll get you back to her." They began walking slowly down the quiet corridor, the hum of distant voices growing louder as they neared the main part of the mall. Sandra stayed close, keeping an eye out for any sign of the boy's mother. Keanu scanned the crowd ahead with sharp focus, every movement and sound filing into his awareness. When they stepped back into the edge of the atrium, the scene was calmer but still disorganized. A few people were crying quietly, clinging to loved ones. A pair of security guards were directing shoppers toward exits, while another stood near the fountain, speaking into a radio. Then Sandra spotted a woman, her hair messy, her face wet with tears, frantically speaking to a security guard. Her hands moved nervously as she described something. Even from a distance, Sandra knew. This was Liam's mother. "Liam," she whispered, pointing. "Is that your mom?" The boy's eyes widened and he nodded quickly. Keanu crouched again, his voice gentle but firm. "Let's go to her slowly, okay? She's been scared too." They stepped forward, moving carefully through the thinning crowd. But just as they neared the fountain, a commotion erupted on the other side of the atrium. A man had slipped near a wet patch on the floor, falling hard. The sound startled people, and for a moment the crowd's tension spiked again. Liam hesitated, his small body trembling as the noise around them rose. Keanu didn't waver. He knelt to meet the boy's eyes again. "Eyes on me, buddy," he said softly. "Breathe. You're safe. Storms pass, remember?" Sandra stood beside them, shielding Liam slightly with her body. She felt a surge of admiration for Keanu's steadiness, the way he could ground others even when chaos threatened to rise again. As the commotion settled, Liam's mother turned and spotted them. Her eyes widened with recognition, and she broke into a run, her sob catching in her throat. She dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around her son, holding him so tightly that for a moment it seemed she might never let go. "I thought I lost you," she whispered, her voice breaking. Liam clung to her, burying his face in her shoulder. Keanu stepped back slightly, giving them space. Sandra felt her own eyes sting with tears. The mother looked up at them after a long moment. When she recognized who they were, her breath caught. You stayed with him," she said, her voice trembling. "We couldn't just leave him," Sandra said softly. Keanu offered a small, humble smile. "He's a brave kid." A security guard approached, thanking them quietly for helping keep the situation calm. People nearby began to murmur, some whispering in awe as they realized who had stepped forward tonight. But Sandra felt no need for recognition. She and Keanu weren't here as movie stars. They were simply two people who had done what anyone should do. As the crowd dispersed, the boy's mother pressed the bracelet box Sandra had dropped earlier back into her hands. "You dropped this," she said gently. Sandra blinked in surprise, realizing she had forgotten about it. "Thank you," she whispered. When the mall finally emptied, the echo of footsteps faded, leaving only the soft hum of escalators restarting. Outside, rain had begun to fall lightly against the glass doors. Keanu held the door open for Sandra as they stepped into the cool night air. They walked side by side across the wet pavement toward the parking lot. For a while, neither spoke. The night's events hung between them, heavy yet somehow comforting. Finally, Sandra broke the silence. "You didn't even hesitate," she said quietly. Keanu shook his head slightly. There wasn't time to think. "Sometimes you just move," she glanced at him, her eyes soft. "You didn't just move for me. You moved for everyone." He shrugged lightly, humility in every gesture. "We're all just people. Sometimes we're all somebody's lifeline." As they reached their cars, Sandra noticed a small group of mall staff and security quietly watching them from a distance, not with celebrity awe, but with gratitude. One of the guards gave a small nod, a silent thank you that spoke louder than words. Keanu opened his car door but paused, looking back toward the glowing mall entrance. "Tonight was supposed to be ordinary," he said softly. "It was anything but," Sandra replied. Neither of them knew it yet, but the night's events were already spreading beyond the walls of the mall. A teenager had captured a brief moment of Keanu shielding Sandra on a phone camera, not for fame, but as proof of kindness. By morning, the world would be talking about a simple, quiet act that had reminded everyone how powerful it is to show up. As the rain fell steadily around them, Sandra and Keanu lingered for a moment longer before parting ways, both carrying the unspoken feeling that this story, the one that had begun in a crowded mall, was far from over. Rain drummed softly against the city's sidewalks the next morning, washing away the scattered remnants of last night's commotion at the mall. Yet the story of what had happened was already traveling quietly through phones and whispers. A short video clip, the moment Keanu Reeves had stepped in front of Sandra Bullock to shield her from the surging crowd, had been shared overnight by a teenager who had filmed it, not for attention, but to show her friends that kindness still existed. By dawn, the clip had begun to spread far beyond their city. Sandra woke to her phone buzzing endlessly on her nightstand. Dozens of messages lit up her screen, texts from friends, calls from colleagues, and notes from strangers thanking her and Keanu for reminding them that compassion mattered. She rubbed her tired eyes, staring at the screen in disbelief. She opened one message from a school teacher in another state. It read, "My students saw the video this morning. They said, 'Look, famous people can be kind without cameras telling them to.' You made their day." Tears prickled at the corners of her eyes. Across town, Keanu was at a small cafe, quietly sipping coffee at a corner table. His phone, too, was buzzing with notifications he hadn't expected. He scrolled past the headlines, none of which he cared for, and paused on a message from an old friend who rarely reached out. It simply said, "You reminded me of who I want to be today." Keanu set his phone down and stared out the window. the rain blurring the world outside. But beyond the internet's reaction, a deeper ripple was forming. Someone important had seen the video, someone neither of them expected. A representative from a children's hospital messaged their shared publicist, explaining that the hospital's fundraising gala was losing donors and spirit. "Our patients watched the clip," the message said. "They said if two people like them can care for strangers, maybe the world still cares for them. Would they visit?" When Sandra read the invitation later that day, her heart squeezed. She called Keanu immediately. "They need hope," she said simply. "Then we'll go," he replied without hesitation. The following evening, they arrived at the hospital quietly, without announcing it to the press. The hallways smelled faintly of antiseptic and fresh flowers. Bright murals painted by patients lined the walls, each one filled with rainbows, stars, and smiling stick figures. A young nurse greeted them warmly, her tired eyes lighting up as she led them to a small recreation room where several children waited. The room was filled with soft music and the gentle hum of machines. Some of the children were in wheelchairs, others curled under blankets. Yet when Keanu and Sandra walked in, their faces brightened instantly. Not because two movie stars had appeared, but because kindness had. Keanu knelt beside a boy with a buzz cut who held a sketchbook. "What are you drawing?" he asked. "A superhero," the boy said shyly. "But he doesn't have powers. He just helps people." Keanu's eyes softened. "That's the best kind of hero." Sandra sat beside a girl whose small hands trembled slightly as she held a crayon. The girl's drawing showed a rainbow stretching over a mall with two small figures holding hands. "That's us, isn't it?" Sandra whispered. The girl nodded. "You didn't know anyone was watching, but you still helped." My mom said, "That means it's real." Sandra felt tears sting her eyes again. She smiled and gently touched the corner of the paper. "It's real," she said quietly. Later, the hospital staff gathered in a small circle with them. One nurse confessed that morale had been low, donations declining, and families losing faith. "But today," she said, "everyone's talking about the video. They believe again. You reminded them that small actions matter." As they prepared to leave, a teenage boy who had been silent the whole visit finally spoke. "Can I tell you something?" he asked Keanu and Sandra. "Sometimes I feel invisible. But today, I don't." Keanu placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "You're not invisible," he said softly. "You matter more than you know." On the drive back into the city, the air between them was quiet but full of meaning. Streetlights blurred past the car windows, streaking the darkness with gold. Sandra looked out at the glowing skyline and said, "I thought last night was the end of that story, but maybe it's just the beginning." Keanu nodded. Stories don't end when cameras stop rolling. They live on when we keep choosing to show up. But their night wasn't over yet. As they neared Sandra's street, they noticed flashing hazard lights on the side of the road. A small car had broken down, its hood propped open. A young couple stood nearby, clearly overwhelmed. Sandra and Keanu exchanged a glance. No words were needed. Keanu pulled over, stepping out into the cool night. "Need a hand?" he asked gently. The couple turned, their faces lighting up with surprise. Not because of who he was, but because someone had stopped. Together, they pushed the car to a safer spot. Sandra handed the woman her umbrella, smiling. "Stay dry until help comes." As they drove away, Sandra whispered, "This is what people don't see. The small choices." Keanu glanced at her, his expression soft. "But those are the choices that change everything." Far above the city, the clouds began to part, revealing a faint sliver of moonlight. The mall crowd incident had started a wave that was now spreading quietly, through a hospital, through a broken-down car, through hearts that needed reminding, and somewhere in the back of their minds. Both Sandra and Keanu felt it. The night's events weren't just a moment in time. They were the spark for something bigger, something that would test and strengthen their belief in kindness in ways they could not yet imagine. The next morning, sunlight spilled through Sandra Bullock's kitchen window, but her thoughts were far from calm. She sat at her small wooden table, nursing a cup of tea gone cold, scrolling through message after message on her phone. News outlets had picked up the video clip of Keanu shielding her in the mall crowd, and now headlines filled every corner of the internet. Yet what caught her attention most wasn't the headlines. It was the thousands of comments beneath them. Strangers were sharing their own stories. Times someone had stepped in quietly to help them. Moments when a single act of kindness changed everything. Some wrote that they had reconnected with old friends because of the clip. One message simply read, "This reminded me to call my dad." Sandra blinked back tears, overwhelmed by how a small, unplanned moment had rippled outward. Keanu Reeves, meanwhile, was on his balcony overlooking the waking city. He had turned his phone face down, preferring not to chase the noise. Instead, he was thinking about the boy at the hospital, the couple by the road, and the quiet gratitude in the nurse's eyes. He wasn't interested in becoming a trending topic. What mattered to him was whether the moment had made someone believe in kindness again. Just as he set his coffee mug down, his phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. It read, "Your actions inspired something bigger. Meet us tonight at the downtown community theater. You'll want to see this." Keanu frowned slightly, unsure what to make of it. He forwarded the message to Sandra. She called him moments later, her voice curious but cautious. "Do you think it's legit?" "Only one way to find out," he said. "We go together." As evening approached, the two arrived at the small theater. Its old brick walls were lit softly by strings of lights, and the smell of fresh popcorn lingered in the air. Inside, the seats were nearly full. Teachers, nurses, teenagers, and even a few familiar faces from the hospital. Whispers of excitement filled the room. A young woman stepped onto the stage. She introduced herself as a local organizer who had been moved by the viral clip. "Last night reminded us of something we've been forgetting," she said, her voice strong but emotional. "We don't have to wait for grand gestures to make a difference. Small acts matter. So tonight, we're launching something new. The Ripple Project." The audience murmured, intrigued. "The Ripple Project," the woman continued, "is a pledge. Every person here promises to do one quiet act of kindness each day for the next month. No cameras, no social posts, just kindness. And tonight, we wanted the two people who sparked this wave to see what they started." The audience turned toward Sandra and Keanu. Applause broke out, not loud or flashy, but warm and sincere. Sandra felt her throat tighten. She glanced at Keanu, who lowered his head slightly in humility. After the event, people gathered to share ideas. One teenage boy said he planned to help his elderly neighbor carry groceries. A nurse promised to write handwritten notes of encouragement for her patients. A single father spoke quietly about forgiving a friend he hadn't spoken to in years. As the room buzzed with plans, Sandra stepped outside for a moment of fresh air. The sky above was streaked with purple and orange as the sun dipped below the skyline. Keanu joined her, hands tucked into his jacket pockets. "Did you ever think a mall trip would lead to this?" she asked softly. Keanu shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Sometimes the smallest spark starts the biggest fire." Their quiet moment was interrupted by a young woman approaching hesitantly. She held a folded letter. I wasn't sure if I should give this to you," she said. "But my little brother saw your video last night. He's been struggling. He told me today was the first time in months he felt like the world could be good again." Sandra accepted the letter with trembling hands. "Thank you for telling us," she whispered. Later that night, as they walked to their cars under the glow of streetlights, they noticed a man struggling to load heavy boxes into an old truck. Without a second thought, Keanu set down his jacket and walked over. "Need a hand?" he asked. Sandra followed, holding the truck door open while they loaded the boxes. The man thanked them quietly, unaware of who they were, just grateful for the help. As they drove away, Sandra couldn't shake the feeling that the universe was weaving something bigger around them, something that wasn't about fame or headlines. But as peaceful as the night seemed, the next day would bring a challenge neither of them expected. A well-known talk show host had invited them to appear live, not just to discuss the viral video, but to respond to criticism from someone claiming the moment was staged. The news hit them early the next morning. Sandra read the email, her stomach sinking. "People will doubt anything," she muttered. Keanu, ever calm, simply said, "We'll face it the same way we face the crowd, with honesty." And somewhere in the city, people were already taking sides, their opinions swirling like a new storm on the horizon. The kindness that had united so many was about to be tested. The morning of the live talk show arrived like a brewing storm. Social media was ablaze with chatter. Some voices praised Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock for their quiet bravery, while a loud minority claimed the viral video was staged for attention. Headlines flashed words like fake heroics and scripted kindness across feeds. Sandra sat in her dressing room staring at her reflection, the studio lights bright but cold. She wasn't angry, but a deep sadness settled in her chest. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Keanu holding 2 mugs of tea. His calm presence filled the room instantly. "I thought you might need this," he said softly. She took the mug and managed a small smile. "Thank you. Are you nervous?" "Not about the truth," he replied, sitting beside her, "but about how people forget what really matters." When they stepped onto the stage, the audience clapped warmly at first. The host greeted them with enthusiasm, but soon steered the conversation toward the controversy. "Some people believe the mall incident was set up," the host said carefully. "What do you say to those claims?" Keanu leaned forward slightly, his voice steady. "We didn't know anyone was filming. We didn't do anything special. We just helped," Sandra added, her voice soft but firm. "The boy we helped is real." His mother's tears were real. Sometimes the world looks for tricks when the truth is simple. For a moment, the studio was quiet. But then the host surprised them, playing a pre-recorded clip on the big screen behind them. It was a video message from Liam and his mother, the boy from the mall. Liam's small voice filled the room. "They saved me," he said, clutching his mother's hand. "They didn't know me. They didn't ask for thanks. They just saved me," his mother added through tears. In a world full of noise, their kindness was the quiet thing that mattered most. The audience erupted in applause, louder and more heartfelt this time. Sandra felt her chest loosen, and Keanu's eyes glistened with unspoken emotion. After the show, outside the studio, a small crowd had gathered. Among them was a teenager holding a handmade sign. "One small act saved my brother." Another person approached Sandra shyly, handing her a note that read, "You reminded me to forgive my best friend." Keanu watched these exchanges quietly, the corners of his lips lifting into a humble smile. But as they walked to their cars, Keanu noticed something unsettling. A group of photographers had gathered near the parking lot, shouting aggressive questions and blocking their path. The air grew tense again. Sandra's pulse quickened. Before things could escalate, a security guard stepped forward, gently parting the crowd. But it wasn't the guard's presence that calmed the moment. It was a single voice from the small crowd of supporters. "Remember why they're here," an elderly woman called out. "This isn't about tearing people down. It's about lifting each other up." The words seemed to ripple through the space. The shouting softened. The photographers stepped back. Keanu placed a hand on Sandra's shoulder, guiding her safely through the throng. Later, they met for a quiet dinner at a small family-owned restaurant far from the flashing cameras. The room smelled of fresh bread and roasted vegetables. There were no paparazzi, no social media posts. Just 2 friends sitting across from each other, recovering from a day that had tested their spirits. "It's strange," Sandra said quietly, stirring her tea. "People saw something good and wanted to tear it apart." Keanu nodded. "But look at what else happened. The Ripple Project, the hospital, Liam's message. Maybe the noise is just proof that kindness is powerful enough to shake people." As they spoke, the restaurant door opened and a man in a worn jacket entered. He looked around nervously before approaching their table. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said, his voice uncertain. I was in the mall that night. I didn't know what to do when the crowd surged. But seeing what you did, it made me realize I can step forward next time." Sandra reached across the table and gently touched the man's hand. "That's all any of us can do. Step forward when it matters." As the man left, Keanu watched him disappear into the night, the weight of the day settling into something gentler. But just as they were beginning to breathe easier, Sandra's phone buzzed with a new message. It was from the children's hospital they had visited earlier in the week. A young patient wants to give you something. Can you come tomorrow? Keanu smiled faintly. The universe isn't done with us yet. They didn't know it yet. But the next day would bring one of the most emotional moments of their journey. A moment that would melt hearts far beyond any screen or headline. The next morning, soft sunlight spilled across the city. But inside the children's hospital, a quiet excitement was building. Nurses whispered in the hallways, doctors exchanged knowing glances, and a small group of children giggled as they huddled around a handmade banner. Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves arrived quietly, slipping through a side entrance to avoid unnecessary attention. As they walked down the familiar corridor lined with colorful murals, Sandra felt her heartbeat quicken. Something about the message from the hospital, the promise that a young patient wanted to give them something, made her chest ache with a mixture of anticipation and tenderness. Keanu walked beside her, calm but curious, his eyes scanning every detail as if he already knew this moment would matter. In the recreation room, sunlight filtered through wide windows, illuminating rows of chairs where children and staff had gathered. At the front of the room stood a little girl no older than 8, her head wrapped in a soft scarf, her small hands clutching a folded piece of paper. Her smile trembled with nervousness, but her eyes shone brightly. The head nurse gently announced, "This is Emma. She wanted to say something to you." Emma took a deep breath, unfolded the paper, and began to read in a soft but steady voice. "Dear Sandra and Keanu," she said, "I saw the video of what you did in the mall. I was scared that the world wasn't kind anymore. But then I saw you protect someone and help a little boy. It made me feel like maybe the world is safe." Her voice caught for a moment, but she pushed on. "Because of you, I told my mom I wanted to try drawing again. I drew something for you." She handed Sandra a small picture, a rainbow stretching across a mall entrance with 3 small figures standing beneath it, Sandra, Keanu, and Liam. Under the rainbow, she had written in careful letters, "Kindness saves." Sandra knelt, her eyes glistening, and pulled Emma into a gentle hug. "This is beautiful," she whispered. Keanu crouched beside them, his voice quiet but full of warmth. "Emma, you've reminded us why this matters." The room was silent except for the soft sound of sniffles from nurses and parents wiping their eyes. A boy in a wheelchair clapped softly, breaking the silence, and soon the entire room joined in gentle applause. Afterward, the hospital staff surprised them with a small gesture. A wall in the children's wing had been painted overnight with the words, "Storms fade, kindness stays," surrounded by colorful handprints from the patients. Sandra traced her fingers over the letters, feeling the weight of the journey settle into something unshakable. Outside the hospital, as they walked toward their cars, they noticed a small crowd waiting, not reporters or paparazzi, but ordinary people holding handwritten signs, "Thank you for reminding us," and "Be the ripple." One elderly man stepped forward, holding a photo of his late wife. "You don't know us," he said quietly, "but you reminded me of her. She used to say, 'A small act can heal a big wound.' You healed something in me." Later that evening, they met again at the same small cafe where Keanu had sat alone just days before. The city outside glowed with evening lights, but inside, the world felt smaller and gentler. They sat across from each other, 2 friends who had stumbled into something bigger than themselves. "We didn't plan any of this," Sandra said softly, stirring her tea. "The best things aren't planned," Keanu replied. "They're chosen, one small step at a time." She smiled, her eyes still damp from the day. "It feels like the world needed this reminder." Keanu glanced out the window at the passing cars and pedestrians. Maybe we all did. The cafe door opened, and a young couple entered with Liam and his mother. They spotted Sandra and Keanu and rushed over with excited smiles. Liam hugged Sandra tightly and looked up at Keanu with shining eyes. "People at my school saw what you did," he said proudly. "They said I'm lucky. But I told them, anyone can do what you did." Keanu ruffled the boy's hair, humbled. "You're right, Liam. Anyone can." As they all shared laughter and warm drinks, the noise of the cafe faded into something softer, a sense of community, of hearts knit together by a single night's unexpected storm. Outside, the rain began again, but this time it wasn't a storm. It was a gentle reminder of the world's constant renewal. As the evening ended, Sandra and Keanu stepped outside under the soft drizzle. They didn't rush to their cars or check their phones. They stood quietly, watching the city lights shimmer through the rain. Sandra broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think people will remember this?" Keanu slipped his hands into his jacket pockets, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe not every detail, but they'll remember the feeling. And sometimes, that's enough to change everything." They walked down the sidewalk side by side, their steps slow and steady, carrying with them the weight of the story they had lived and the ripples it had sent across countless unseen lives. Behind them, the world moved on. Shops closed their doors, cars honked in distant traffic, and streetlights flickered in the mist. But somewhere, a child picked up a crayon, a stranger forgave an old hurt, and someone decided to step forward instead of looking away. Storms fade. Kindness stays, and sometimes all it takes is a single quiet act to melt a world-weary heart.